Oh, okay. This is a good one. We can react to this one. And hopefully we can do this without getting some sort of weird copyright strike whenever I go to upload the video. If not, we'll just put it up on Rumble. I did fast forward a little bit just because they had the gun barrel and the James Bond theme playing at the beginning. We talked a bit about favorite James Bond. Mentioned that Brosnan is tops for me just because he's what I grew up with. But definitely a fondness for Timothy Dalton. I think highly underrated James Bond. Loved him in The Living Daylights. And License to Kill wasn't bad, but I preferred his first film that he did, which was The Living Daylights. There's quite an entrance there in the whole Gibraltar scene at the beginning. And I love that whenever he lands on the yacht, grabs the cordless phone from the lady, calls in to headquarters, and just like, yeah, exercise control 007 here. We'll report to you back in 1 hour. And she's offers him some champagne. She's like, don't you want to stay a little bit longer? And then he just turns his phone and he's like, yeah, better make that 2. Playing GoldenEye was peak back in the day. It is an absolute travesty and practically a war crime that we don't have a playable version beyond emulation out there of GoldenEye, along with a lot of the other Bond games that have been really good. Like the ones that Pierce Brosnan was in, like 007 Nightfire. His performance in Doctor Who was spine-chilling. Oh, you mean Timothy Dalton? Yes. I'm trying to remember who he played. But yeah, he was part of the Time Lords Council. But yeah, no, he is Rassilon. Yes, Rassilon the Destroyer. That's right. He was a good Rassilon. Dalton is, and I think that's what lends to his performance, which I do believe is quite an accurate portrayal of what we see in the original Ian Fleming novels. Bond is very much an anti-hero. He is... basically, he's a bad guy doing good things. Taking his powers and using them for good for... at the time was for Queen and country. But that just means that he is so good at being villains. I mean, he is fucking brilliant. He honestly, he deserved a BAFTA for that one. But anyway, we're going to lean into the whole meme of thing or place and then thing or place Japan. There is apparently a Japanese James Bond that we've never heard of. And so this is an interesting little movie review from Titan Goji of the film Ironfinger.
James Bond needs no introduction, but I'll give a brief one anyway. Originally based on the works of British espionage novelist Ian Fleming, the James Bond series of films follows, well, James Bond, an MI6 agent known as 007 who travels the world on secret missions to take down terrorists, corrupt politicians, a bald guy in a wheelchair, all for the sake of keeping the world at peace and being a complete womanizer. Needless to say, over 6 decades and 26 films, James Bond left quite an impact on entertainment as we know it.
Why did they make George Lazenby's gun look like it was empty and needed to be reloaded? That was definitely a decision.
Especially in Japan, with Lupin III, City Hunter, and Metal Gear Solid all...
Yeah, all of these inspired by, at least in part, by James Bond. City Hunter is kind of a jokey... It almost seems like this combination of what you would find with James Bond, but also the whole boy-girl detective setup that was really popular, especially on American television in the 80s. You had shows like Remington Steele, which had a much younger Pierce Brosnan. You had Moonlighting with Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. There's one that took more of a spy angle called Scarecrow and Mrs. King. And there were, I think there was Heart to Heart was another one that had Robert Wagner and Stephanie Powers, and that was 2 incredibly rich people with nothing else better to do but become private investigators. Yes, Golgo 13 was another good one. Golgo 13, much grittier. So you could see a lot of inspiration, not just from James Bond, but also I could see a lot of inspiration from performances like Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry, a lot of Charles Bronson films. Very dark, very gritty, and very much an unforgiving sort of killer. Lupin the Third might have started out that way, but was more parody. But then Hayao Miyazaki got a hold of the character and definitely redeemed him from what we saw in the manga. Lupin the Third in the manga was not only ruthless killer, but also quite the sex pest, and in a very bad way. In fact, Monkey Punch said that the depiction of Lupin the Third in Castle of Cagliostro was so different from what he originally envisioned. He said, had he written the screenplay and the storyboards for Castle of Cagliostro, he would have had Lupin not necessarily save the damsel in distress, but just take advantage of the situation and take advantage of her sexually. And that sort of thing is just unthinkable in the wholesome eyes of Hayao Miyazaki, who did Castle of Cagliostro. Fantastic film, by the way. Escape from New York from Metal Gear, yes. Snake Plissken, Solid Snake, especially in MGS2, traveling under the name Iroquois Plissken. Even the original Metal Gear logo, the font is the same as is an italicized version of the Escape from New York title font. But then again, I think it was Hideo Kojima who said something like 60 to 90% of his existence is movies. So there's that.
All taking influence from this beloved franchise. Yet, as enduring as this series has been up to this point, no obstacle will be greater than 007's greatest challenge yet, being bought out by Amazon. But we're not here for that.
God help
As
us all.
stated, James Bond and Japan have quite a unique history with one another, and it essentially started with 1967's You Only Live Twice.
That was actually a co-production between United Artists and Toho Pictures. Much of the on-the-ground production work in Japan and on-location shooting was done by Toho, which, if you know anything about them, they're probably most famous, their biggest export, Godzilla.
Which was 007's only venture into Japan for the time, up until 2012's Skyfall, where he goes to Gukanjima, the same location where Attack on Titan was filmed, as it was getting ready to open up as a tourist location. Felt like I needed to point that out. It is You Only Live Twice where Bond would be featured alongside actresses Akiko Wakabayashi and Mie Hama, known for their roles in the Godzilla series.
Oh yes, that's right. King Kong vs. Godzilla, also Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and Mie Hama also had a part as a villainess in the film King Kong Escapes, which was a semi-sequel to King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's the one where we got King Kong going up against Mecha King Kong.
And legendary actor Tetsuro Tamba. It's also where Sean Connery infamously does Yellowface as part of a critical plot point where James
And not very well, we might add.
Bond has to pretend to be Japanese, so do what you will with that. In the midst of 007's global popularity, lots of riffs and films inspired by the famous spy would come about. Notably the Mission Impossible series, Austin Powers, and Stephen Chow Lee-Luk Cheese from Beijing with Love.
Now there's one I haven't seen, From Beijing with Love. I think I'd like to see that one. It looked like Frankenstein's monster there.
There's also the film Casino Royale that predates the films and spoofs the novel of the same name, but honest to God, avoid it like the plague.
Speak much of it again!
While James Bond
Yeah. About the only redeeming quality of that particular film, Casino Royale, is the portrayal by Orson Welles of Le Chiffre. He was good. And I think previous attempts to make a Casino Royale movie, I think possibly even the one that had been bandied about with Cary Grant, I think it was also floated the idea that Orson Welles should be the main villain in that particular film. I could be wrong about that.
capture the hearts and minds of audiences and filmmakers alike, one of these was none other than director Jun Fukuda, who at the time was developing all sorts of action and crime thrillers at times.
Yeah, also prolific director of Godzilla films. I believe, I'm trying to remember which ones he did. I know one in particular was Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, which was originally conceived as a King Kong film before they swapped out for Godzilla. But what else? I think he did Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in 1974. Godzilla vs. Gigan in 1972. It was, for most of the Showa series run, it was a back and forth quite often between him and Ishiro Honda. But yeah, and some of the more beloved titles from that era of Godzilla we owe to Jun Fukuda in the director's helm.
Toho, such as the second entry in the International Secret Police series, Fangs.
Oh, and this one is Kumi Mizuno. Kumi Mizuno was Miss Namikawa in Monster Zero, which was the second film, direct sequel to Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Another film in which Godzilla goes up against King Ghidorah and also teams up with Rodan. And Kumi Mizuno plays Miss Namikawa, one of the very sexy alien space women. Falls in love with Nick Adams. Nick Adams' character there. Nick Adams actually, at the time, at one point, admitted he fell in love with her, and even asked her to marry him, but she was engaged to someone else, so she declined. What an interesting timeline that would have been. Two famous actors in a monster film playing each other's love interest, and then later on they fall in love off screen and get married. And who knows, she might have been good for him and kept him out of trouble, because Nick Adams, I think he passed away in the 70s, sometime in the early 70s. Had a drug problem, substance abuse problem of some kind, and off screen was not a well man. Good actor, fairly decent as a leading man, but yeah, I don't know.
The Tiger, and Blood and Diamonds starring Akira Takarada, many of which were...
Oh, yes. Akira Takarada. That was... I'll back up this video just a little bit. Akira Takarada, I think he may have had his debut in... or maybe not. I know he was one of the... He was the result of a talent search in the early 1950s with Toho. And so one of his early works was the first Godzilla film. But yeah, definitely had leading man vibes. Sometimes compared quite positively with actors like Cary Grant. He definitely had that presence. And even more so as he got older. Definitely had that leading man and authority figure aura whenever he acted. And he has some really good roles. If you want to see Akira Takarada in his elder years, two films in particular were seen. The 1992 version of Godzilla vs. Mothra and Godzilla Final Wars. He was also really good in that one too.
Thrillers at Toho, such as the second entry in the International Secret Police series, Fangs of the Tiger, and Blood and Diamonds starring Akira Takarada, many of which were influenced by James Bond one way or another. But perhaps the most popular of this bunch would be Fukuda's 1965 action comedy, 100 Shot, 100 Killed, otherwise known by its international title, Ironfinger, named after the third Bond film Goldfinger from the year prior.
Yeah, there was a lot of... Especially as you started getting into the late 60s, there was a lot of knockoffs of James Bond, and a lot of titles given to spy films and comedy spy films that leaned heavily into sort of imitating James Bond in a lot of ways. Ironfinger being one of them. And then you had... there was a series of films, it was a short series of films, done by Michael Caine in the 70s. Trying to remember the name of them, but they were actually produced by one of the Bond producers, Harry Saltzman, with the express intention of, okay, we've got James Bond, and he's sort of set the standard of what spy movies are supposed to be like. Let's do the inverse. Instead of someone posh and world traveler and whatnot, let's have someone a bit grittier who stays closer to home. That way we can have sort of an alternative product to appeal to the opposite market and make some money off of that.
And despite what I mentioned earlier, this actually came before You Only Live Twice. Writing the screenplay would be Michio Suzuki and Kihachi Okamoto, who interestingly would later collaborate on Age of Assassins, directed by the latter. The story follows a man who gets caught in the middle of a secret mission after witnessing an Interpol agent get executed upon returning to Japan.
You see this a lot with Japanese films. A lot of emphasis on Interpol. A lot of things being done with Interpol agents. The real life Interpol, yeah, I don't think they would have this aggressive presence anywhere in the world. And Interpol, it's often joked that they're more the tax police than anything else. They just sort of make sure everyone's paying the taxes no matter where they are in the world.
In his final moments, the agent urges him to find a mysterious individual named Lebois, and the man proceeds to assume the identity of French Interpol agent Andrew Hoshino, though he insists that we can call him Andy. In pursuing the assailant, Haneda Airport faces an attack.
I'm probably getting ahead of the video, but I don't care. I'm trying to remember. It might have been King Kong Escapes. There's a bloke from the United States. I think he ended up starring alongside an ensemble cast in The Magnificent Seven. But he had a few Japanese films that he starred in. He was in Mothra. He was in King Kong Escapes. And then he was also in... he played the villain in Godzilla vs. Megalon. I forget it is Robert something. But I think it was in King Kong Escapes he played an American spy named Mark Jackson. He had floated the idea of possibly doing a series with the Mark Jackson character. Never really got off the ground though. It's amazing how many projects never made it past development at Toho over the years, especially Godzilla films.
Orchestrated by an arms dealer.
Wasn't Interpol common in the Jason Bourne books? I don't know. I think I've seen the Bourne Supremacy and the Bourne Ultimatum. I have not seen the Bourne Identity. And I have not read any of Robert Ludlum's books from the Jason Bourne trilogy. So, not sure about that.
Named Huang Zhangling, who is smuggling weapons from Hong Kong for the Akatsuki crime family, rival of the Aonuma family that serves Lebois. Tensions rise amongst these groups as Andy gets deeper into the criminal underworld, using his unorthodox methods of espionage to get as close to Lebois as possible and take him down. Playing the role of Andy Hoshino is the late and legendary Akira Takarada, known for—
He was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Movies were mid, but the books were good. Yeah, they probably mid by today's standards now. They were considered groundbreaking for their time in terms of pacing and cinematography. Before then, you did not have a lot of handheld camera work in action films. And the Bourne films in particular, they used a lot of free cam, no tripod type filming. So the whole thing is kind of a jittery mess. But that style of action did end up having... It did well at the box office, and so well that the producers of the Bond films. Just a moment, chat. Yeah. Anyways, what were we talking about? Oh, Bourne films. Yeah, had an impact on the James Bond films eventually, to where you see sort of an abrupt departure from everything they were doing in the 90s to different approach that just kept shifting and transforming the longer Daniel Craig was the lead character. That's fair. Just mean the movies had almost nothing to do with the books beyond the initial premise of the first movie. Yeah, a lot of that, without having read the books, my guess is that probably because the books were written, what were they, like 10, 20 years before the films were created. So a lot changes in that time. But also, that's Hollywood for you, isn't it? It can be hard to find a faithful adaptation of books, depending on what it is you're watching.
His performances in countless dramas in his career that spanned nearly 70 years, but more notably his many appearances in the Godzilla series. Takarada is the genuine heart and soul of the film. His range as a performer does absolute wonders, as he can go from being an unassuming individual to a very suave and badass spy instantaneously, which also makes for some brilliant moments of comedy. Even in scenes that are meant to be played for laughs, like the scene in the bathroom where he fights with a plunger, still manages to be inherently comedic, but also played very straight. Same goes for when he runs through a bowling alley during a chase. Takarada also looked back at his...
I'm glad they didn't get that slapstick with some of the Bond films in both the 60s and even in the 70s. You had some silly moments like that car chase scene in Man with the Golden Gun, where that could have gotten a lot more slapstick than it actually did. I think you not only have the director, but also Cabby Broccoli to thank for that. Always keeping things fairly grounded.
Role of Andy Hoshino with great fondness, even citing it as one of his favorite performances, which also got a shout out in Godzilla Final Wars, which was unfortunately mistranslated and completely reinterpreted for overseas localization.
Mr. 100 Shots.
His chemistry with the other actors is just seamless, as he really feels like the glue holding everything together with how effectively they bounce off one another. Alongside him is famous Japanese comedian and King Kong vs. Godzilla actor Ichiro Arashima as Detective Tezuka, who in a way is a mirror to Andy. Whereas Andy is someone posing as a spy and being very good at it, Tezuka is a professional but comes off as incapable in comparison. But this isn't...
He's the bumbling sidekick. The Roger Moore era was so bad, in my opinion. Definitely a lot of the weaker entries in the franchise. Moore himself was brilliant. And so much of the design and the approach and the lore with Lord Rexworth owes a tremendous debt to his portrayal, not just as James Bond, but also as Simon Templar, the Saint, and another character he's not very well known for in other parts of the world, but beloved in Britain as Lord Brett Sinclair from The Persuaders.
To say he doesn't have highlights of his own, like early in the film where he waits for a car chase to pass by before exiting his vehicle just to tell his driver to go chase it. Or when he finds out that LeBois abducted Andy through a walkie-talkie, and he still finishes his sentences with over. And of course, we need our Bond girl, who comes in the form of explosive specialist Yumi Sawada, played by the aforementioned Miyahama before appearing in You Only Live Twice. Like with a handful of Bond girls.
They're another great, Terence Young and Lewis Gilbert and John Glenn, probably just the three musketeers of fantastic directors. Peter Hunt was really good with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think he should have been given more opportunities to direct, because he was really good with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but because that one did not do so well at the box office, not only was Lazenby eventually dropped, but also Peter Hunt had to go do other things. Haruki Tsukio, hello, hello. How are you doing?
Girls in the series, she's absolutely very capable.
And please, you don't have to call me Lord, you can just call me Rex.
And can hold her own in the most tense situations. She's also the most headstrong and collected of the group, as if she's the only person in our main trio who's
Certainly knows how to dress well too. Look at her, she is lovely. Doing good, and you? Doing alright? We are discovering for ourselves a Japanese version of James Bond. Well, you are doing the Lord's work. Well, I don't know about that, but I do try.
treating the situations they face with as much care as possible, despite being a little clumsy. It's also her clumsiness that's responsible for some of the most gruesome kills in the entire film. Though it's—
Oh no. Cyanide-filled cigarette lighter. You can tell that her wardrobe, very 60s mod for the time, I think they took a lot of inspiration from Diana Rigg from the Avengers. That was her costumes all throughout that series. They were definitely, it was trendy and in vogue at the time.
honestly a very unique spin to give the Bond girl the biggest kills. It's also nice to see something derivative of James Bond of this era that portrays a very tasteful treatment of its women characters. Oh yeah, that's another thing too. For being an action comedy, Ironfinger is surprisingly gory at points. People get burnt with acid thrown at their faces, and one of the villains crashes into a biplane propeller. Speaking of, I wouldn't be surprised—
Yeah, that sort of thing would never have passed muster with the Bond films of the time. Though the Bond films could be fairly violent in their own way. But it was always according to international standards, and they knew where the line was and they didn't cross over it. But, I mean, this is a different country. This is a film made in Japan for a Japanese audience. So, it's a bit different over there.
if that same sequence inspired the climax of the final Mission Impossible film.
That's possible. Also, as far as the romance and any sort of love scenes or anything like that, yeah, definitely a lot more wholesome in a film like this. You saw the allusion to the Goldfinger scene between Bond and Pussy Galore, and yeah, that one has been called problematic because, well, I mean, Bond is basically forcing himself on her and ends up fucking the lesbianism right out of her.
For villains, Jun Tatara can really pull off being this endearing but kind of incompetent arms dealer as Huang. Even though he may have valuable connections, we get the sense that he's aware of his expendability and does what he can to keep his place in this complicated web of crime by exchanging secrets between crime families and his association with Yumi. Alongside Huang is Josuke Akatsuki, played by Kurosawa collaborator Saichio Sakai. He's only—
Yes, a lot of these actors that you see in this film, I mean, this is one that's a bit more slapstick and comedic, but these are also people that have serious acting chops that have acted in iconic films, like ones by Akira Kurosawa. Even the actor who ended up playing Godzilla in the suit, he was in Seventh Samurai. I think he was a supporting character or an extra or something like that. Well, yeah.
A taste of what the villains of this movie have in store for us, as he's the first real obstacle that Andy is faced with, from a very fun chase sequence to a beautifully crafted sword fight between him and Andy. It's also this crime
So many, I mean, I'm willing to bet that so many of the people who work on the action sequences of this film, anything with the special effects, probably a lot of these people worked under men like Subaraya, Eiji Subaraya, who was the godfather of special effects for Toho, not only during wartime, but also especially in the post-war era. I mean, he's the one who pioneered the notion of suit-motion acting with Godzilla. So a lot of this that you see here with the special effects, with the action sequences and everything, same stuff you would find in Godzilla films, because it was a lot of the same talents working on multiple films at the same time. I miss good fight choreography. I do too. That's one thing I love about classic films, is that you can always count on finding some fairly decent fight scenes.
Family that inadvertently gets Andy sucked further into the matters within the film, so while they may not have a lot to them, there's enough to justify their importance. Probably the second best performance of the film has to be crime boss Komori Aonuma, played by Toho regular and Godzilla veteran, the great Akihiko Hirata.
Ah yes, Akihito Hirata, famous as the original actor who played Dr. Serizawa in the 1954 Godzilla film. Played his share of villains in lots of Toho films. He was actually supposed to be he was supposed to play Professor Hayashida, sort of elder scientist figure, in The Return of Godzilla in 1984. Unfortunately, he passed away from cancer, I think about 6 months before filming was supposed to start. So, and unfortunately that role had to be passed on. Thankfully they passed it on to a colleague and co-star of his. I forget the actor's name, but he was the lead detective in Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. So yeah. Just missed the not CGI look of old movies. If you ever want not CGI and lots of practical effects, Japanese films from the 50s onward into the 80s and even into the 90s, chock-a-block full of them. Especially old Godzilla movies. The way they were able to make these films on tight deadlines and extremely limited budgets compared to what you would find in Hollywood. Nothing short of amazing. Pure art. Little wonder they're now being preserved in the Criterion Collection.
Komori is easily the most straight-edge character in the entire film, as he's really no different from your typical action villain whose presence absolutely dominates over everyone else's with just how despicable he is. In addition to clearly being someone with a lot of power, he may not be the main villain, but with his imposing demeanor and sinister performance, he may as well be. And this is honestly maybe my favorite role of Hirata's outside of Dr. Serizawa in the original Godzilla. But the primary antagonist, LeBois, played by Mike Deneen, unfortunately gets severely overshadowed by everyone else. Granted, that mostly has to do with his character being mysterious and more alluded to rather than being shown, but once he's revealed in the end, you can kinda tell he doesn't have much to do other than boss others around and be the end goal of the narrative. But to give credit where credit is due, the character of LeBois does speak for the overall scale this movie aims for. Despite the nature of Japanese film productions being very limited even to this day, the scope of Ironfinger is subtle but feels massive, as the story doesn't only bounce.
It's another example of Toho doing a lot with very little. But they also have the geographic advantage of being in Japan, a land where there is 4 seasons, and there's multiple different climates. You've got forested areas, you've got beaches, you've got tiny little islets. And you can make use of all of that with on-location photography. Honestly, I should ask my mother. She would send Japanese anime and stuff home when she worked in Japan decades ago. She probably knows a movie or two. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure she's got plenty of recommendations for you. But failing that, I would say Criterion Collection. You can actually sort by country or region and find lots of just brilliant films from Japan preserved as part of their collection, including Godzilla films, all of the Showa-era Godzilla films, and they're starting to acquire and preserve the Heisei-era films, which are really good. Kurosawa's films are in there. There was the series from Daiei and Toei of... Gosh, what was it? Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman. Welcome back, Action. And thank you for the quack redeem. As y'all say, what's all this then? We are looking at a review and peek into a rare Japanese film designed. It was actually designed to be the Japanese James Bond. It's called Ironfinger, and it stars Akira Takarada.
Across different parts of the world, it's also one of the handful of Japanese films to actually be shot partly outside of Japan, such as when they're in the Philippines, and how Andy, being a French spy, is supported by the fact that Akira Takarada phonetically learned his French dialogue, which there's plenty spoken throughout.
That's incredible. And, I mean, I can only imagine how difficult that is for someone who doesn't speak the language, but also, having to go from Japanese to French like that. Never heard of the Criterion Collection. Very interesting. Oh, it's so good. They actually have a streaming service available. Gosh, I don't know how much it is. I think it's like $7.99 or $10 a month or something like that. But you get access to everything, and it's commercial free. And it's just really, really, really good films. And we're talking art house films from France to classic or obscure American films, films from the UK. I think they've got a few. Preserved in the Criterion Collection is the Soviet version of... It's a film adaptation of War and Peace. I want to say it is epically long. Something like 4, 5, maybe 6 hours long. But considered the definitive version, the definitive film version of War and Peace. Almost lost to time, almost damaged irreparably by poor preservation techniques or lack thereof in Russia. But the Criterion Collection got a hold of it, cleaned it up, and now it's, I believe, available for streaming and also available on Blu-ray. That's another thing. Criterion Collection, they don't just do streaming. They also put all of their films on physical media. So definitely a credit to them. It's funny, never thought of that aspect about Japanese films because they usually just film everything within the country. Yeah, it's rare for them to have to go outside of Japan for anything. But I don't know. The reviewer here, Titan Goji, maybe, I don't know. There's, I think, a distinct difference between on-location photography and then on-location B-roll photography. So it is possible that what they really did was just kind of B-roll establishment shot exterior footage mixed in, interlaced with shots of the actors on a soundstage. So that's possible that more realistically what we're dealing with this, which was quite common even back in those days. I know, even with a lot of fairly big budget television productions for ITV, like The Saint, The Persuaders, The Protectors, those 3 shows in particular, plenty of on-location shooting, but also at the same time, they tended to cheat a bit and you'd be amazed how much of it was actually on a soundstage, like at Shepperton Studios or something like that. Especially the Saint. There were a lot of locations all throughout the world, especially in those first few years, that they quote-unquote went to, but most of it was kind of the B-roll footage, and then the rest of it that featured Roger Moore and the actors, that was on a soundstage and in Shepperton. Anyways, getting a bit off track here. Let's keep going with the video.
The film.
Une semaine à Bangkok et maintenant à bord d'un avion. Qu'est-ce que vous arrive, mademoiselle?
Je suis vraiment vexée. Mon impresario a disparu.
C'est ça. Il est français, n'est-ce pas?
Oui, oui.
Vous le connaissez depuis longtemps?
An unfortunate omission in the second, but we'll get to that. Takarada also drew from his time growing up in Manchuria for Andy's body language and character interactions, which I would highly encourage listening to his 2019 interview at G-Fest, where he shares plenty of these experiences. It is insane stuff to hear, but speaks so much of the dedication he had to his craft.
That really does sound like that would be incredible stories to hear. And it also speaks to, this was a man who grew up in a time when the world was a very different place. Because we are talking about someone who grew up in a part of the world that underwent radical change, grew up in Manchuria, part of China that was occupied by Imperial Japan. Yeah, anyway. But yeah, grew up in a part of the world that underwent radical change, growing up in Imperial Japan occupied Manchuria, which we don't even refer to it as Manchuria anymore. We just call it China. It's good that they got stories of his immortalized on video, because so many of those stories oftentimes just don't get told or get brushed over by other moments in history. So I think something like that is very much worth preservation, and I'm glad somebody got that on video. Why does this look like something out of a Yakuza 0 side mission? This film in particular, you could probably say it does give off that vibe.
Briefly touched on the visuals earlier, but the cinematography by Shinsaku Uno is just stellar. Uno manages to come up with very creative ways to follow the action or put it on display with unique angles, wide and medium shots with lots of depth, and tracking shots that make them feel more tangible. The sword fight with Akatsuki is the best example of this, but there's also the comedic rush that comes with the...
A lot of this ended up carrying over to the same company's television productions, albeit on a more limited budget. A lot of those camera angles we just saw, you would end up seeing a lot of the same things in like Kamen Rider or Super Sentai type productions.
Initial chase, as well as the tension that comes with the finale. And of course, the identity of Ironfinger isn't complete without the groovy and versatile score by the incredible Masaru Sato, the same man behind the compositions for many of Kurosawa and Keiichi Okamoto's works and several Godzilla films for good.
Yes, that's right. Masaru Sato, friend and colleague to the original Godzilla composer Akira Ifukube. And quite often throughout the run of the Showa era Godzilla films, if Ifukube was not available, they would turn to Masaru Sato. So yeah, there's Son of Godzilla. I know he did the second film, Godzilla Raids Again. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster was another one of his. Let's see, what else did he do? And then there was Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. That one, I think, was, of all of his Godzilla film scores, that was his magnum opus. Especially that rousing score when you've got Mechagodzilla disguised as Godzilla fighting against Anguillus and then reprisal of that same score in the final battle between Mechagodzilla, Godzilla, and King Caesar. That was, yeah, that was really good work from him.
Good measure. You would think that a Bond riff would resort to pulling from the catchiness of the 007 theme, or some of its sweeping orchestral pieces.
Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. There was already a huge row going on with the British press over someone mistakenly claiming that John Barry was the one who composed the James Bond theme instead of Monty Norman. And Monty Norman managed to extract £30,000 out of, I think it was the Daily Mail for that one. Even though, let's just be fucking real, based off of everything that I've read, everything that I've heard, Monty Norman didn't really know what he was doing in Dr. No. And so he had some sheet music that he had formulated, but ultimately it was John Barry who gave it life. So maybe the original riffs were by Monty Norman, but it was John Barry who had to come in and compile everything together and try to make sense of it all and turn it into proper themes. Just thinking in-universe, cannot imagine how expensive it would be to disguise Mechagodzilla as regular Godzilla. With that particular movie, it was as simple as creating a second suit with certain bits of the skin that they could sort of peel off and replace with metal-y bits to sort of give the impression that there is a mechanical clone underneath that skin. That's how they ended up making it work for the film.
But Sato goes out of his way to make the soundtrack of Ironfinger stand on its own.
Very jazzy. If I had to compare it to anyone, sounds very similar to what you hear with the original Mission Impossible theme. I'm not talking about the Tom Cruise films. I'm talking about the actual TV show that came first, and that was I'm trying to remember what's the name of that composer? Lalo Schifrin. Lalo Schifrin was the original composer of the music cues and the theme to Mission Impossible. And fun bit of trivia, he initially had some sort of march-style version that he presented to Desilu as the theme for Mission Impossible, and that was rejected. He managed to come up with the theme we know now as the theme to Mission Impossible in approximately 3 minutes. And that was back in the late 60s. Wait, in 3 minutes? Yeah, I think he took his March version that he had presented to Desilu and just reworked it as a jazz theme and did that in about 3 minutes. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say.
Sure, it may have a little bit of that Bond flair, which is inescapable, but it all works so smoothly, selling the tone of every moment wonderfully. There is much to be said about Ironfinger as a film. Thankfully, this and its sequel, Golden Eyes, are both available for streaming on the Criterion channel.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I thought I recognized Ironfinger. So yes, another reason to subscribe to the Criterion channel. Because they've got Golden Eyes and Ironfinger available for streaming over there. And if you are a film buff, if you're someone who loves just really good classic films from all over the world, you'll be very happy with a membership to the Criterion channel. I think it'll be worth every penny. Probably worth more to you than something like Netflix or Hulu. And worth a damn sight more than a Disney Plus subscription, because they give you a lot for your money here.
So you don't have to do any deep digging just to watch it. But that said, it's such an underrated film, despite everything it has going for it. It's just a blast all around, as everyone involved is putting in their best work, while also clearly having fun at the same time. Needless to say, it is a gem to behold. But speaking of the sequel, Golden Eyes came to follow in 1968, its original title being 100 Shot, 100 Killed, Golden Eyes. Yep, believe it or not, this one beat GoldenEye to the punch by 27 years, though the name actually came from Ian Fleming's estate in Jamaica, built in 1946, where he...
That's where they got the name for GoldenEye. That was originally the estate of Ian Fleming in Jamaica.
Wrote the novels.
I believe it's a tourist attraction now. You can visit it and even see, I think they even have like the desk and the typewriter set up where he would sit down and type out the manuscript for the Bond novels. Did that all throughout the 50s and into the early 60s. And it was a very regimented, very disciplined approach that he had to it, surprisingly. Ian Fleming would have a breakfast late in the morning of scrambled eggs and, toast and bacon, that sort of thing. He'd go out snorkeling for a few hours, and then he would come back anytime he was here at GoldenEye, and he would sit there for at least a few hours, and he would type out, at a minimum, a few thousand words for the manuscript. And by the time he was done with his time for the year at GoldenEye and returned to London, he would typically have a manuscript that he could hand over to his editors and publishers, who would then do their work and then release it as a Bond novel. And they kept doing that for several years, even after his death, until they finally got to the last one, The Man with the Golden Gun. That one, I think, had to be a lot more heavily edited and massaged, just because by that time, creatively, Ian Fleming even admitted to himself he was running on fumes. He's like, I'm running out of ideas here. This is going to be the last one. Was wondering more of where the title of 100 Shot, 100 Killed came from. I don't think they've gone into that exactly. Or if they did, I missed it. I don't know. Streamer brain. We'll chalk it up to that.
Fukuda, Suzuki, and Takarada would come back, but everyone else, save for composer Masaru Sato, was either absent or replaced. No Kihachi Okamoto for this one, unfortunately.
Why did you leave me?
For instance, instead of Ichiro Arishima, Makoto Sato is in the role of Detective Tezuka. In Golden Eyes, Andy Hoshino is caught in a gold smuggling operation that was being pursued by Detective Tezuka, as they both happen to run into each other in Beirut, Lebanon. Right away, the story is much more subdued and the characters are played very straight compared to how they were depicted prior. Not to say the movie doesn't have its comedic moments, they're just not as prevalent here. And the chemistry between Andy and Tezuka is still strong, which I found very surprising given the recast. A testament to how Makoto Sato really held his own in the role. And Andy is still good ol' Andy.
あなたがインターポールのアンドリュー星野氏ね。
アンディと呼んでください。
Though this
Just
does
call
work
me
in the
Andy.
movie's favor in being an overall different experience from Ironfinger. It's more Bond-like, but still goes out of its way to feel more in line with what Fukuda has established. As for the movie's Bond girl, we have Ruby, played by Bibari Maeda, who some may recall from Son of Godzilla.
Oh, yes, Bibari Maeda. Yeah, it is a cutie. Also, an interesting choice that you can't get away with now for their Middle Eastern actors, or the people in the roles of Middle Easterners, they're donning brownface. Yeah, you definitely can't get away with that these days. I know that feeling of running on fumes creatively. It's when you just got to take a vacation and let the tank refill. I know with the Bond novels, Fleming had started to kind of run out of ideas, or felt like he should put an end to it. With From Russia with Love, but it was at the urging of his publishers, and of course the public loved them, that he kept going until finally he said, okay, Man with the Golden Gun, this is going to be the last one, and a couple of short stories, and I'm finished. But also by that time, he was dealing with a lot of health problems. He had gotten into some legal trouble over Thunderball with Kevin McClory, and so that had put tremendous stress on him to the point where he was having heart trouble. He didn't exactly live the healthiest of lifestyles either. Quite the heavy drinker, heavy smoker. I mean, as you do back then. But yeah, it was by around... It was to the point that 1963, I think he had... A few years had passed since he had handed over the manuscript for Man with a Golden Gun to his publishers and his editors. And yeah, 1963, he had a heart attack and he passed away, unfortunately.
She ends up following Andy's trail under orders of the antagonist, but eventually goes rogue in favor of joining him, and has her own special tricks to her. Tomomi Sawa as the singer Mitsuko is another neat addition. While her character isn't given too much to do, her place feels natural with the sorts of twists and turns that the narrative takes. Speaking of the villains, Yoshio Tsuchiya puts on an excellent performance as the henchman Kurokawa. You just know that if you put this man in a role of the opposition, he's going to give a memorable performance no matter what.
He's a good buddy. He makes a good buddy.
Whoa! Is that blackface, dude?
Yeah, that's a thing in this movie.
Yeah, no, well, we might call it brown face more than anything, but yeah, that was a thing with some of these films. Even King Kong versus Godzilla, they for the Islanders, they definitely went heavy on the spray tan, we'll put it that way.
Yes, it really is a Bond film. Though if there is one thing this movie has above Ironfinger, it's the main antagonist, who here comes in the form of Turkish actor Andrew Hughes as the blind boss Stonefeller.
Andrew Hughes, now he has been in... He was in a lot of other Toho films. I know he was... I think one of his earliest appearances was in The Mysterians in 1956. But I know he was also in Destroy All Monsters in the late 60s. I think he had a couple of other Godzilla films and other titles under his belt. But yeah, he was one of those go-to type foreign character actors that they could turn to consistently. And I believe he spoke fluent Japanese. So they didn't have to... I don't think they had to dub his voice at any point. They just let him speak normally and just use that audio.
He has such an intimidating presence to him that's elevated by Hughes' devilish performance that easily puts him within the ranks of some of Bond's best villains with his...
Yes. And it's quite the departure for Hughes, because with so many of the films I mentioned, especially those monster movie films, he didn't play a baddie. He played a good guy. Oftentimes, he's sort of this like expert figure, like a professor or a doctor or, some sort of trusted person of authority that just so happened to be a gaijin who spoke fluent Japanese. Lol, the smiling friends clip, yeah.
Unsuspecting demeanor and very creative ways of dispatching those who defy him. Having a blind gunman use a microphone to sniff out his enemies is just brilliant. It's a shame that he's dubbed over in Japanese by Masao Takato, as Andrew Hughes does have a strong voice that would have enhanced his character.
You
say our country is big. But in reality, 70% of our land is desert.
But there's enough to get across.
He's good. He's supposed to be Turkish. He sounds like he would be perfect in any role in a British television or film production.
Even if it doesn't aim for the heights of Ironfinger, GoldenEye still feels like a grand adventure that spans across the world, conveyed by the amount of on-site shooting overseas in the Middle East, even if we clearly go to the Toei quarry at points. I know the way I'm breaking down
that Toei quarry, that company got a lot of mileage out of that quarry, because it is in so many films, so many television shows. I think just about every tokusatsu television show filmed out there, all of the Kamen Riders, all of the Super Sentais, all of the Metal Hero series, all of them. If they needed a large open air outdoor kind of rocky background location, it was that quarry. That was where they went.
Golden Eyes comes off like it's a lesser Ironfinger, but please do not get me wrong, this movie is still tons of fun. The cinematography by Kazuo Yamada injects so much style into the narrative and how visceral and experimental it can be. In conjunction, the sound design and by extension Masaru Sato's music do a great job selling tension and suspense. Such is the case with the final gunfight against Stonefeller, as the heavy shadows and lack of music build a sense of dread and uncertainty.
Oh yes. That's a great way to build tension, is just cut the music and quite often minimize as much sound as possible so that you keep your audience's eyes and ears focused on little things like that. Because that's what your eyes and ears are paying attention to in those moments. The ricocheting of bullets and the smoke and dust coming off of the metal like that. It's good. This is good. This is good filmmaking here.
And what's 100 shot, 100 killed without some
This is unironically absolute cinema. Also builds tension, absolutely.
really fun action and espionage sequences? I've already mentioned how utterly masterful the final act is, but the opening and the shootout at the Toei Quarry are standouts in how they help set the tone for the film. The car chase is exciting too, and there's this bit where Andy has to tread alongside a building. All things considered, Golden Eyes is a very charming film on its own. Despite the various changes in tone, cast, and story, it feels like a very natural progression from the over-the-top nature of Ironfinger.
The 60s were good economic times. And usually in those times, we notice that there's a pattern with films where they don't take themselves too seriously. But as you start to get into the late 60s and into especially the 70s, things started, the world was changing, economies turning south, and films started going back to earth. Films started becoming much more grounded, much more serious. So natural progression here as the world changed over the years. Now imagine this with Jackie Chan's stunt work. I can. And it's mainly his early works like Police Story. If I had to come up with a comparison.
I've said earlier, the fact that this sequel is so different is what helps it stand out. I like that it doesn't try to be a direct continuation to Ironfinger, but rather, Golden Eyes is just the next big adventure of Andy Hoshino and Detective Tezuka. I know it carries.
Yeah, and it wasn't just with the Ironfinger cities. You saw this with Godzilla, the only remaining characters that you really see throughout Showa, Heisei, and the Millennium Era is Godzilla. Everyone else is a revolving door cast. So, with the one notable exception, the Heisei era being Megami Odaka as Miki Sagusa. She started when she was really young. I think she was just like 17 or 18 years old at the time that she got the part in Godzilla vs. Biollante. That was in 1989. But she continued with that role all the way to the end of the Heisei era films with Godzilla vs. Destroyer in 1995. So that was a good 6-7 years of work for her consistently. After having done one or two television shows in the 80s about a delinquent schoolgirl that fights crime at night. Or something like that.
Takarada has unfortunately passed on in 2022, but I would have loved to see more films come out of 100 Shot 100 Killed, just to see what kinds of shenanigans Andy would get caught up in. I feel like this should have been a film series that evolved alongside the rise of action stunts in Japan. But seeing how the Japanese film industry would reach a decline in the 70s thanks to the exploding popularity of television, perhaps the end of 100 Shot 100 Killed was only inevitable either way.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really realize that the decline in Japanese cinema was kind of a slow burn, but brought on by television. Because it was one of those things where more people were buying television sets and watching television in their homes than they were starting to go to the cinema and see a film. Even the Godzilla films, you look at ticket sales, and they just start dropping off in like the late 60s and into the 70s, and they just never recover after that. Even the Heisei era didn't even come close. And that was some of the best work that they did, I think. And it was to the point where certain franchises, certain serial franchises of films, like the Zetoichi series, would eventually exit cinemas and get developed into television shows. I know that's what happened with Zetoichi. They would sometimes release 2 or 3 films in a year, and that went on all throughout the 60s and into the early 70s. I think they finally stopped around 1972, 1973, when all of that went over to television. And quite often, as filler episodes, they would just reshoot, or oftentimes just re-release in full screen, breaking it up into multiple episodes, the events of the previous Zetoichi films, similar to streaming killing cinema. Yes, very much so. The Japanese had that happen to them decades before it started happening to everyone else in the world.
Though, could you imagine a TV series based on these films? Just have Andy Hoshino travel around taking down smugglers and arms dealers in different parts of the world like it's another Tuesday.
It is quite possible they could have done that on the limited budget of television. I think it is quite possible. And it's a pity that they didn't follow up on that.
Buy that for a gold Samantha coin. It's a miracle that both of these films are available for streaming on the Criterion channel. Otherwise, we wouldn't have access to what are easily some of the best action flicks to come out of Japan. And from the great Jun Fukuda, no less.
Yes.
I absolutely cannot recommend this pair of films enough.
That's absolutely brilliant.
And if you like this video, check out the time I reviewed Yasuzo Masumura's Blind Beast. Another overlooked gem if you ask me.
Alright, we've given that a like. I'm going to post that into chat for everyone. Meanwhile, streaming is becoming cable, and physical media is making a major comeback because of how much streaming has been fumbled right now. Yes, quite so. They had the chance to really be solid alternative to traditional media, and instead they just became traditional media with similar prices to boot, because they've just lost track of what it is that made them good to begin with. And now it's about clawing back equity and clawing back the money that was invested at the expense of the customer. And what you get is the typical in-shitification of platforms. Thankfully, the Criterion Collection has not succumbed to that. Not yet, anyway.